Welcome to today's webinar, Layered Security for the Redefined Attack Surface, Part 1 in Switchshop's Defense in Depth series. Before handing over, I'd just like to take you through some brief housekeeping. To the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a chat box. This is a public chat where you can alert us to any issues you may be encountering, or anything else you'd like to let us know. The next tab is questions. We'll have a Q&A at the end of today's session, so please place any questions you may have there. These are private and will only be seen by presenters. So now let me introduce you to Michael Curry, Director at Switchshop.
Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the first of our series of webinars celebrating Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're kicking off today with our colleagues from Fortinet, discussing the importance of layered security for the redefined attack surface. This in many ways is the perfect kickoff to our series, which looks to explore the theme of defense in depth and the importance of taking a layered approach to securing your networks and systems with tools that don't just sit at the gateway or on the client, but can provide effective mechanisms for defense, detection, and importantly, response throughout the network. My name is Mike Curry, and I'm Sales Director here at Switchshop. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd love to meet you all in person, but hopefully this will serve as a good grounding for the topic today. And if you'd like to discuss anything further on a one-to-one basis moving forward, please don't hesitate to contact us, any of us that you hear from this afternoon. I'm joined today by Anthony Lee from Fortinet, who will be guiding us through our time together, as well as Richard Bolton and Gareth Piggott, who are some of the senior account managers that make up part of Fortinet's team. So as Jen mentioned, throughout the webinar, we'll be offering the chance to ask questions in the chat tab at the side. So please do make use of that, and we'll address those queries at the end of the session in the Q&A time. If we do run out of time to answer them all, we'll take note and contact people individually. So please do pop them in there if anything comes to mind. Just very briefly, for those of you who don't know Switchshop, we're a leading value-added reseller in delivering network and security infrastructure solutions. We work heavily in the public sector across secondary and higher education, local government, and of course with the NHS. We are first and foremost, and this is key to us, we're a technically led company. Our focus is putting the right solutions to the right customers. Of course, we factor in budget restraints and real-world practicalities, but first and foremost, we look to deliver the right technical solution. That's why we invest heavily in our professional services team and ensure we're working with the best manufacturers in the industry. We're here with one of those today in Fortinet, with whom we're just one of a handful of expert level partners in the UK, which is testament not just to our sales position, but rather how technically capable we are and how we work collaboratively with our customers. That accreditation, of course, covers the whole portfolio from their SD-WAN capable next-gen firewalls through to their wireless switching, network access control, client, EDR, just to name but a few of them. So I'll stop waffling on. I'll hand over to the main event, over to Anthony, and he can kick us off.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Really looking forward to this. So good to be here. It's quite an interesting topic. So Mike mentioned the title, Layered Security for the Redefined Attack Surface. And I think that really hits a few of the salient points that we're going to talk about. Security is changing rapidly. And at Fortinet, we're seeing that more than a lot of organizations. So it's important to talk about some of the trends and threats we're seeing. But also, I like the word redefined attack surface as well, because we're living in a very different world to where we were, almost even 12 months ago. Everybody's working at home. That's likely not to change for the foreseeable future. So it's quite an important topic. And just a little bit about who Fortinet are. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with us. We were founded in 2000, so we're about 20 years old. We're the number one cybersecurity company in the world, and we can be a little bit bullish about that. And there's a number of reasons for it. We're the most deployed by far. 30% of all firewall and UTM appliances come from us. And I think the security industry, as I say, it's going through a lot of changes. But I think unless you're still at the core in terms of having a firewall, in terms of being truly relevant, I think it's a major thing to be able to have that. So it's a big achievement. 30% of all firewalls worldwide come from us. We're also the most validated by far. We're recommended in 9 out of 9 NSS labs. So performance and accuracy is absolutely critical to what we do. We're also the most patented. I think something like 3 times our nearest competitor. So first and foremost, we're a technology company. There's a ton of people here with brains the size of planets that go out and invent all this stuff. But at the forefront of what we do, our mission is to deliver the most innovative, highest performing network security fabric that in turn is going to help secure and simplify an organization's IT infrastructure. So that's who we are. And I'll just move on to the next slides. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the industry landscape and customer challenges that we're seeing there. It's quite an important topic, as I mentioned, and we're seeing a lot of problems that have been around for a long time and a lot of new and emerging threats for a variety of reasons. So we'll touch on that. And just to get into this, we talk about digital innovation or digital transformation, call it what you will. And it says it there, it's disrupting all industries, markets and segments. And that's something we're seeing a lot of, particularly in government, healthcare and education. We're seeing a lot, only last month when the universities students started returning, there was a lot of cyber attacks aimed at higher education. So the NCSC issued an alert saying that they'd seen a big spike in attacks on educational institutes and a bunch of ransomware attacks and incidents started turning up. So a lot of that relied on social engineering and the sort of politics of the time. But again, it sort of shows you that at the end of the day, that there's somebody behind a keyboard somewhere doing something to cause this. So the threat actors and the malware authors sort of, it's a lot more targeted now. They'll sort of do a lot of reconnaissance, and when you map it up to the cyber kill chain, it really does start with that reconnaissance level. So we still see a ton of phishing alerts and the traditional security issues that have always plagued us, but that kind of high volume but low risk stuff, a lot of it is taken care of by automation and AI and machine learning now, whereas that low volume but high risk factors, things like ransomware, are causing a real problem. So we'll take a look at that. We're also seeing a ton of things happening in critical national infrastructure, and OT is very much a hot topic at the minute. So how do we protect against that? And again, what is it that the malware authors and the bad actors are trying to do? At the end of the day, they're going to try and exfiltrate some data, whatever that may be. So how do we take care of that, really? So that's the situation that we're looking at. And again, just to expand on that a little bit, this digital innovation that's causing these increased risks, as I mentioned, the threats are becoming more sophisticated. Ransomware incidents are continuing to increase. And a lot of the attacks that we've historically seen over the years have been for financial gain. And now that ransomware is so prevalent in our everyday life, it's almost a secondary source of income for a lot of the threat actors, and that's why we see a ton of ransomware incidents continuing. The digital attack surface is expanding. I'll touch on this in a few minutes, but the perimeter is absolutely expanding. We're seeing billions of security edges formed. Everyone's got 2 or 3 devices. As I mentioned, everybody's working from home. So how do we ensure that they can do that safely and securely? And then the ecosystem, I think in the industry as a whole, cybersecurity is such a hot topic. There's a lot of vendors out there doing a lot of very innovative things to try and help solve the problem. But this kind of point touches on it, that there's not enough skilled people, and we talk about the skill shortage a lot, and I'll come on to my thoughts on that, because I think there are a lot of very talented people out there in the IT industry. I think one of the problems maybe is that they're not doing the things they're supposed to do, maybe because they're inundated with alerts, or they're doing a lot of repetitive tasks that maybe we could look at automating. So how do we manage that complexity that we've created for ourselves? And then compliance is a huge issue. It has been for since I started in this industry, but certainly over the last few years with GDPR, it's increased here in the UK. I think in the past there was a perception that for some reason the United States had this big dirty network and we're getting hit with all these huge cyber attacks. I think the reality of it is that over there that they just had to announce it, a lot sooner than we have in the UK and in Europe. So I think that's you sort of scratch beneath the surface, and there's a lot of attacks been going on for a long time that have gone uncovered or unreported. So compliance is a huge issue that we're seeing as well. So just moving on, as I said, the threats are becoming more sophisticated, and companies that we see are facing this increased sophistication. A lot of it's driven, like I say, by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And you're faced with that challenge of the known threats. As I mentioned, it's the high volume but low risk, but also those unknown sophisticated attacks. And we know from various sources that the average cost of a data breach now has creeped up to £4 million. And last year, data breaches themselves exceeded 5 billion. So we know that number isn't slowing down. So what can we do to protect ourselves? One cause of these breaches, as I mentioned, is ransomware. They're becoming a lot more tailored and targeted. In fact, something like 50% of all breaches and ransomware are a result of social engineering and email phishing. So it still relies on somebody somewhere clicking something maybe they shouldn't. And then when you think of WannaCry and what was so unique about that, it kind of bucked that trend. It didn't really rely on human interaction. So we saw a huge increase a couple of years ago. So that's the kind of situation. As I said, the more recent one is related to the COVID-19 pandemic we're in, and it hit a bunch of educational institutes where we saw a big spike in ransomware attacks. So the cyber criminals are going to carry on evolving. Nothing's going to change there. They're going to bring more innovation and sophistication as we are as a security company, and hopefully the pandemic isn't going to leave organizations distracted while they set up remote workers and home workers, especially in organizations that maybe haven't been as quick to adopt to that home working philosophy. So that's the advanced threats that we're talking about. And I've just put this slide in to show you what Gartner are saying about it. And this is in particular focusing on the endpoint. And as this presentation goes on, I'll focus a little bit more on the endpoint. And I'll hopefully show you a short demo of our EDR tool, our endpoint detection response tool. But what's interesting is that from an attacker perspective, their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, they're not changing dramatically, but some of these trends are evolving. So, take for example the cloud. Organizations are moving to the cloud at quite an increasing rate. So we see a bunch of cloud-related incidents, and what follows then is cloud best practices. So how can we secure the cloud? We're also seeing that the malware authors are growing a little bit more adept at working across different operating systems and device types. So whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So those traditional barriers to success for an attacker are actually lessening over time. So to put it more simply, attackers can do more things in more diverse environments, and that's leading to an increase in threats. So the malware authors are innovating. They're constantly trying to evade detection technologies. They're not just relying on updates to existing malware. So for example, like I say, cyber criminals that might historically target personal information and credit card information, they turn into things like ransomware as that secondary source of income. They're also outsourcing various tasks to monetize operations a lot quicker. Again, if you think of the cyber kill chain all the way from reconnaissance through to exfiltration, and especially some of the bigger attacks that we see, actually turning that into cold hard cash can take a lot of time for them. So why not just throw some ransomware out and try and monetize it a lot quicker? So we see things like the malware authors targeting corporate reward systems, maybe to steal gift cards and things like that, and then sell them on or use them to make direct purchases themselves. So as Gartner have highlighted, the security mindset shifted to say, well, look, preventing these things alone, it's not enough. You've got to be able to harden the endpoints. You've got to be able to do that incident response and resolve alerts, and also do it in a very timely fashion. So those are some of the challenges just focused on the endpoint security. Now, this is quite an interesting slide as well, and I've borrowed this from the Mandan M Trends report, which is quite an interesting read. I'd sort of urge everyone to go and look at that. They produce it every year. But what we're looking at here is a couple of different graphs. So the first one is compromised notifications, and what we're talking about here is how do you find out you've been breached? And if you look back 9 years ago, 94% of all compromised notifications were external. So that's things like a tap on the shoulder or being tomorrow's front page news. Virtually everything was being detected by somebody else. Whereas if you fast forward to last year, it's almost come down to a 50-50 split. And again, if you break that down into various geographies and various industry sectors, and specifically for the UK, again, it's kind of that 50-50 split we're seeing. So it's quite interesting. And what's also interesting is that median dwell time. So what we're talking about here is that the number of days an attack is present in a victim network before they're detected. So again, 9 years ago, it was something like 416 days somebody could lie undetected. And just monitor the network, see what's going on, spread laterally across there, maybe target something initially and then move up through the different layers. Whereas now it's dropped right down to 56 days. And what's interesting in that is, for me, is it shows that the industry itself and also organizations are actually getting a lot better at cybersecurity. There's no single reason why for this. As I say, there's more vendors. There's a lot more vendors out there. We're becoming a lot more smarter and innovative. But also, it's that awareness that's probably leading to better visibility across the entire security spectrum. Or, organizations are actually investing a lot more in their cybersecurity programs and becoming a lot smarter as well. So I'd say that's the good news. And again, it goes back to what the title of this presentation is: layered security for the redefined attack surface. So I'd say that, looking at that, it's not all doom and gloom, but we absolutely need to keep innovating and changing and stopping some of the threat actors. And again, before I get into the main bulk of the presentation, what's interesting is where these targeted attacks are coming from. So something like 7% use compromised third-party access. So that's the typical problem with supply chain. You can protect yourselves with that layered defense, but what about the organizations you're dealing with? And also interesting for me is less than 1% involved in insider. What we used to see is, if you think of an organization, I don't know, like a call center where you might get fairly young employees that maybe aren't paid as highly as others, and if they get approached to maybe exfiltrate some data, so that's the malicious insider scenario. Whereas nowadays, I don't think the threat actors need to do that. There's so many routes into an organization, and it's so easy to do that they don't need to rely on those malicious insiders as much. And then the rest of it just shows the things that we normally see. So most of it involves data theft of intellectual property, maybe espionage end goals. A lot of it is for financial gain, extortion, ransom, card theft, as I mentioned. And also there's a percentage of it that serves no purpose apart from creating compromised architecture to further attacks down the line, which maybe the malware authors can then sell on to all the bad actors. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing. So how do we approach this? And I think from a Fortinet perspective, we highlight that there's maybe too many vendors out there. Again, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there's a lot of companies doing a lot of good things, but I think that the issue here is a lot of those point solution vendors have got products that maybe don't communicate with each other, and also do you have the ability to create automated workflows and push policy changes across different product solutions. So it's that scenario where you go into a SOC and you'll see a poor security analyst with 4 or 5 different screens in front of them. We call it the swivel chair scenario, where they're sort of swiveling between the different screens, and they've got different products up on their screens, a ton of alerts coming through. A recent study showed that something like 35% of organizations out there are seeing between 10,000 and 500,000 alerts every day. And actually about 25% of those alerts that get investigated turn out to be legitimate. So you've got about 75% that are just false positives or just not actually important or necessary to look at. So we're seeing maybe too many vendors, too many alerts. What's also very important is that manual and slow response time. As I said, I think the lack of skilled professionals that maybe make it difficult to manage and maintain point products is something that needs looking at. How do you attract and keep hold of the best talent out there across the different industries? There's a huge difference between public sector, private sector. So how do you keep hold of the talent that you're training up and also keep them interested? If I was a forensic analyst and I spent all day checking spam filters and seeing if something is on Virus Total or not, I'd probably get bored quite quickly and then go off and do something more interested in a different place. So how do we automate those repeatable tasks and free up those highly skilled, highly qualified people to do the job they're paid for, which is the more interesting threat hunting, whilst at the same time keeping that response time as low as we can. And with a lot of the Fortinet products, we can knowingly reduce that window of exposure from days or weeks or even months down to a few seconds or sub-seconds. We've got a lot of artificial intelligence products. We've got a lot of machine learning. So it's quite a compelling story. That then has a knock-on effect from a business case to things like ROI and actually getting more for the money that you're investing in it. So we're seeing a lot of that ecosystem complexity is leading to slow response and mitigation. Now, from a Fortinet point of view, what we see is that today's perimeter, it's kind of hard to define it, whereas previously the data center was once the network's primary point of entry and exit. But we've seen this huge explosion of connected devices. We're seeing things like 5G. We're seeing hyperscale cloud deployments. They're all pushing the perimeter further and further across that entire infrastructure. Also, what's important is the number of applications we're seeing. So number of applications and number of connected devices. It's creating this situation where there's billions of edges that have got to be managed and protected. And if you look at some of the things, I think Google did a survey and said something like 80% of traffic is also now encrypted. So again, that creates a new challenge for inspecting malicious traffic, whereas I think in years gone by, a lot of the malware wasn't encrypted. It was a tiny percentage, whereas we're seeing malware coming through encrypted. We're seeing all the traffic coming through encrypted. So how do we do that? And again, maintain that timely fashion and minimizing the workload for the administrators and the analysts. So that's what we're seeing. How do we maintain that balance between managing the risk and automating the operations? We're also, from a Fortinet perspective as well, we're very aware that we've got a very broad and deep portfolio, but we can't do this ourselves. We've been doing this, as I say, for about 20 years, and we've seen almost an evolution in network security where the first generation was connection-based firewalls. The second generation started bringing in content, so next-gen firewalls and UTM. And now we're in this third generation that's infrastructure platform. So you can have a very broad and deep portfolio, but you still need to rely on other organizations and technology alliance partners. And Fortinet have got one of the biggest out there. So we've got over 400 fabric partners as part of our technology alliance. I think that's one of the largest, if not the largest ecosystem out there. The advantage of that is it gives you a really holistic view of your entire infrastructure. So again, it's that visibility word that's key to everything, and that's going to, the knock-on effect of that is it'll give you that improved security effectiveness. It's going to give you reduced complexity. It's going to simplify your operations, all those things. So the Fortinet fabric is a huge part of what we do on a daily basis, and also from a sort of organization's point of view, you've invested in a lot of technology. So let's make sure that you're getting the most value out of the things you've already invested in. And a lot of the fabric connectors can help you do that. So that's just a few examples of the partnerships we're talking about. I might come back to this one towards the end. But yeah, we've got a ton of solutions. Switchshop have got some very interesting sessions coming up as part of the cybersecurity week that cover some of these solutions as well. So it's definitely a topic worth exploring as well. And then from a sort of Fortinet technology vision, I'll sort of say, who we are. So as I mentioned, networking and security are coming together, and that's been our vision from the earliest days. And what that really means is that you can apply security anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's on an appliance, whether it's on a virtual machine, whether it's delivered via the cloud. And at the same time, we can protect all of the edges. We can protect the endpoint, whether it's from a pre-execution phase with endpoint protection platforms, or whether it's from that post-execution with EDR tools and that forensic and incident response capabilities. We can cover the LAN and the WAN. SD-WAN is an absolutely massive part of what we do. Also, the traditional data center with things like the next-gen firewall. And as I mentioned, home working, let's make sure we're protecting that and the myriad of potential issues and obstacles and barriers that brings. So let's acknowledge that parameter has expanded across the entire infrastructure, and let's put some measures in place to, as it says there, security anywhere. Let's try and reduce costs where we can and get more for your money, but also drive up that operational efficiency. So what that really means is that the Fortinet security fabric that's integrated with the whole ecosystem, it gives your users and your applications more visibility. You can deploy them more quickly. You can set the organization up for something that we call intent-based network security. And also something that we're seeing a lot of is that automation word again. Let's build automation across all of the infrastructure elements. And when I talk about the SOC and the NOC, I think it's also important to look beyond that and what the SOC of the future is going to look like, and whether that becomes something like a ROC, a risk operations center, and bring in some of the more business elements to it as well, and how we deal with that. So, merge the technology issues and the business issues to give you that visibility. So that's who we are: predictive security, enhanced user experience. The AI is going to certainly help detect and target a lot of the zero-day threats that we're talking about. From a network operations perspective as well, that's going to drive up your network uptime. So that's going to help with your user experience. And as I mentioned, the Fortinet ecosystem, the Fortinet fabric, let's make sure we're protecting your current investments while just making sure you've got that flexibility to expand and move as quickly and efficiently as you need to. So that's our technology vision. And then just a little bit about our cybersecurity platform before I move on to the EDR piece. So we kind of break it into 4 elements: zero trust network access, security-driven networking, dynamic cloud security, and then the really interesting stuff for me is that AI-driven security ops. So at the core of everything we do is the platform, and the network is always going to be our critical piece. The security-driven networking that Fortinet provides is always going to be part of what we do. We've made a few acquisitions along the way. We build a lot of these things ourselves. But that's going to be your bedrock for building everything else. And then you talk about some of the new sort of industry phrases like SASE and zero trust. So the Fortinet zero trust network access is going to give you that visibility and identification of all your users, all your applications, all your devices, whether they're on and off the network. It doesn't really matter to us. And then we touched a little bit on the cloud security as well. So for us, it includes virtual appliances, it includes hosted solutions. So it's going to extend the core capabilities of everything Fortinet does, and it gives you that same level of cybersecurity and threat intel in and across the cloud as you would if it was delivered on your physical networks. And as I've mentioned a few times, the artificial intelligence-driven security ops, that's going to give you the faster response and remediation. And I sort of mentioned a few minutes ago that we can reduce the window of exposure from days, weeks, or months down to a few seconds. And I've seen some pretty compelling figures that marry that up. And if you think of an experienced security analyst, so someone with maybe 5 years experience, it still might be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Whereas if we can automate that and drive it right down, at the end of the day, there's going to be some malware somewhere doing something. So let's try and automate and use AI where we can. And then finally, the Fabric Management Center, that's our single pane of glass. That's going to help to simplify the operations, and it allows those automation, that automation of a lot of the workflows that we're talking about. So that's the Fortinet cybersecurity platform. I don't want to talk too much about the various products, but it gives you a nice high-level overview of who we are and what we do. And then for me, this is quite an interesting slide. This is one I've put together that talks about the security maturity curve, which I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But if you look at level of protection on the left versus cost of service on the right, and break it down into those 5 areas: secure, defend, contain, manage, and anticipate. Well, actually, what you can do is break it down into 3 other categories. So on the left, we've got reactive, where you've got basic security measures in place. So we're talking about things like physical security, patch management, which incidentally is still an issue. How do we patch things quickly enough? Things like anti-malware and web and email filtering that I've mentioned from a defend perspective. And then as you move up to the contain and manage, this is where some of the newer technologies have kicked in. Things like sandboxing, DLP, endpoint, next-gen firewall. And then as you start moving up to these levels, maybe you've got a SOC or you're thinking of building a SOC, but we can put a lot of these management tools in place. Things like SIM tools, CASB for taking care of shadow IT problems. What applications are out there and how do I get visibility of that? EDR we'll take a look at in a few minutes. And then the top right is where you're almost predicting what's going to happen. And this is where we're seeing a lot of digital transformation take place. And the key to that, to me, is things like contextual threat intel. So it's all very well looking at a bunch of alerts and IP addresses coming in. But unless you get that really deep context behind it, who's attacking me? What do they want? What is my security posture compared to other similar organizations in my industry? What information can we share? And Fortinet does that with our FortiGuard services. As I mentioned, we ship something like a third of all firewalls out there. So the intel that comes back to us that we can then push down to our other products and customers is quite compelling. And to be honest, if you're down at this anticipate level, if you're heading right up here, you're almost going after the people who are coming after you. And for a lot of organizations and customers, that's just not necessary. But if we're starting down here and we want to move here, how can we do that? And I always start by asking a question. So it's on a scale of 1 to 10 questions. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in your organization's ability to detect an advanced threat? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in your organization's ability to detect an advanced threat? And it's a good conversation starter to start looking at where you are on this maturity curve. How much you're investing in cybersecurity, what tools are talking to each other. So it's quite a nice conversation starter. But that's the maturity curve as we see it. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into any of the products there. You could pretty much put the word 40 in front of any of these. We've got tools and products for everything. And as I've mentioned, the ecosystem is absolutely vital for making sure that the products that you've invested in are talking to each other. What's interesting about EDR as well, and I've been working with EDR tools for a number of years now, is even I'd probably say as far, as recent as 24 months ago, a lot of EDR customers were sort of already heading down to this level. It was very much focused on the private sector and various technology companies and very cash-rich organizations. Whereas I think what I'm starting to see now is EDR kick in for a lot of public sector bodies. We're seeing a lot of interest in local and regional government organizations, as well as central gov, but also things like education and healthcare as well. And again, it'd be interesting to find out why that is, whether it is things like GDPR, whether it is the emergence of ransomware. But we're seeing a lot of interest in EDR tools for across every industry and every size and shape of company, which is great to see. And I think as well, previously a lot of the EDR tools were maybe quite hard to manage, and unless you had that forensics background, it's almost like showing someone a video of your house burning down. Well, great. What am I going to do with that? You need someone there to put the fire out. You need someone there to tell you how the fire started, and then you need all your controls in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. By the way, we could put an M in front of that as well. So we've got managed EDR tools. So if you haven't got a SOC or you have got limited IT resources or SOC analyst resources, then Fortinet can do the whole management piece as well. We have a number of analysts that will monitor that and tell you all those things I've just mentioned. So that's where we're coming out from a security maturity curve. And then just talking about EDR, I think so this was an acquisition Fortinet made last year. And it's a fantastic product. It's the only solution out there that does this pre-infection and post-compromise protection, and I'll show you that on the demo. And that's what really differentiates the Forti EDR tools. So we can automatically diffuse any threat as soon as we detect it. So you're getting that real-time protection and stopping the breach. We don't have to quarantine the endpoint. We don't have to terminate processes initially. Let's just take a look at it and validate the suspects to see if it is something we need to take care of. That's going to help reduce that noise, that alert fatigue that I talked about. If we have confirmed it as malicious, we can move it on to the next stage, the response phase. We can start using things like playbooks to automate the responses. So you can design an IR process based on your risk tolerance or the actual category of the threat. And it's an interesting tool. Like I say, I think that's probably my last slide. So I'll skip over to the demo to show you. Let me just share my screen. It's always the fear when you're doing a live demo that the login won't work or something, but it looks like we survived it. So what you're looking at here is the management console of Forti EDR. It can be cloud hosted. It can be installed on-prem or in your own cloud or hybrid. It doesn't really matter. You get all the same features, the same look and feel. From an agent perspective, it's very lightweight. You can put it on a Windows machine, a Mac, or a Linux. It doesn't really matter. But what makes this truly unique is in here in these security policies. So the 4 policies we've got with Fortinet next to them, they're the default policies that come with them. And the organization that Fortinet acquired had something like 45 different patents out for kernel-based protection. Now that's quite significant because it means we've got kernel hooks into all processes, all applications running, every single disk read and write, every memory read and write, every registry read and write. Everything's being interrogated in that same method. So if you expand a few of these, I can see what's involved in execution prevention, whether this is just the traditional malicious file detecting and let's block it. And that's what I was saying about, those high volume but low risk things. Let's just take care of that and block it. We don't want to think about it. And then if you push it down into ransomware, so we can see everything that traditionally makes up ransomware, and again, let's block it. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute or two. From an exfiltration prevention, so what are the threat actors trying to take out of my organization? We can take care of that. So those are the 4 default policies. Now, what that kind of means is, if I go into my event viewer and just take a look at my events, let's just pick one of these. So badfile.exe, I can see I've got a couple of events there. It's been highlighted as malicious. So that's your kind of your traditional malicious event. There's maybe been a file read attempt. So it picked up that classic AV scenario where a file might have been written to the hard disk. Fortinet have identified it as suspicious. That execution prevention policy has kicked in and we've detected it. Now what's interesting is we've got a guided interface as well. So if you have got more junior level SOC analysts, it kind of guides you through to the next stages. So we explain here, that file contains suspicious characteristics, commonly used by malware. We've identified it with a machine learning engine. So we recommend, you might want to retrieve that file from the device based on its path, go onto the forensics tab and do a bit more deeper analysis. From there, you could maybe try and find patient 0 and see if there's been any lateral spread across the network. So it takes care of that east-west traffic as well as the north-south. So that's kind of the traditional example that we see. And if we just sort of up it a notch, I'll pick this one at the top because I know there's a lot going on in it. So again, we've categorized it as malicious. There's 15 different events, and I always use the analogy that if you were to try and smuggle a gun through an airport, you'd get stopped at the X-ray machine. If you broke that gun down into 7 or 8 different parts and gave it to 7 or 8 different people, maybe you'd get through. You don't know, and a lot of the malware that we see kind of does that. So you need to not only look at the file, you need to look at every single event that's involved in it. So over here, I can see Fortinet again, FortiGuard Labs that I talked about, our contextual intelligence. We know the threat name for this. We know the threat type. It's an info stealer. So that one event alone has triggered a few different things. It's triggered the ransomware prevention. So we know it's got a file encryptor in it, which is a classic ransomware technique. So there's a suspicious file modification. Process hollowing, again, that can be quite a nasty one. So a technique used by malware to masquerade as a legitimate process. We also put links through to the MITRE techniques if you wanted to do a bit more analysis on it. And again, as you go down here, you can see the file write access has happened. There's another file being created. A couple of policies have picked that again, so ransomware and exfiltration prevention. So a process code has been replaced. Modification of OS settings. So that's your exfiltration. That's your malware author trying to exfiltrate things. Obviously, this has all been stopped. Again, you can see another file has been created. So you can see a whole ton of things going on. And if I just select that one and go into my forensics, and again, I don't really have a forensics background, but from an ease of use and finding that needle in the haystack, it's pretty straightforward once you've done a couple of these. So I can look at it in these terms, the actual file being created, and what's going on in it. Shadow copy access, again, that's another nasty one. Maybe I'd see something like a file being created. So here I can see background.jpg. Maybe that was the ransomware warning. And I can do a whole ton of things to all of these as well. So, from a traditional, actually, let me just put this into my stacks view so I can see more of what's going on. So I could click on it and maybe do some threat hunting. I could send it off to virus. I could send the hash to virus totals to see what's going on. I can do a whole lot of things there. So it's quite compelling. From a remediation point of view, what do I want to do with it? And this is where EDR tools really kick in. So talk about detection and response. Let's take a look at the response options. Do I want to retrieve a copy in memory? Do I want to remediate? Do I want to delete it or clean up the registry? But what's also more interesting is those playbooks that I talked about. So let's automatically terminate the process. Let's open a ticket with ServiceNow. Let's delete the file. Let's clean the persistent data. Or maybe we want to automatically isolate it or move it to a stricter security policy. We can do that. So that's all from, something pretty nasty. And then what I could also do is look at things like applications. So I can see a list of all my applications running on the network. So we're going back a phase here to the pre-execution phase. And then if I just filter this by critical vulnerabilities, so I can see I've got a couple of browsers there. If I pick this one, this Firefox instance, I can see that, there's a bunch of vulnerabilities there. I can click on the link and find out what it is. And again, within one or two clicks of the button, I can just modify that action. What do I want to do to it? Do I want to move it to a different policy? Do I want to isolate it? Do I just want to send them a message? You can do anything you want with that. And also, the final thing I'll show you is IoT devices. IoT is a massive area. So we can also look at, discovery of not only unmanaged endpoints, but also IoT devices. So what IoT devices are in your network? So I might have things like Apple TV, Amazon Alexa, printers, various things that you can't put an agent on. But if you can get visibility into it, again, it turns the needle in your security efficacy and maturity. So I'm not sure which ones we've got in here. But again, from a visibility perspective, it's quite powerful. Let me just stop sharing my screen because I think that's it for the demo. Go back to the slide deck. So yeah, the final bit I'll say is just, with Fort, I've picked on one particular product there because it's very relevant to the conversation we've been having. But I think with our FortiEDR, what we're kind of saying is it gives you that ability to reduce the risk. It reduces the potential cost of cyber threats. Attacks are inevitable. That's the world that we're living in. But if you can do that precise remediation of the inevitable, then let's make sure that the organization is up and running as well, as it should be. And any automated incident classification is going to minimize that time spent handling those incidents, which goes back to everything we've sort of been saying throughout the presentation. I think that's probably it for me. I think, yep, I'm out of slides, so I will hand back to Switchshop.
Thanks, Anthony. So we do have a couple of questions. The first of which is the NHS has a central licensing agreement which requires us to have Windows Defender ATP deployed to all of our devices by the end of this month. Is EDR still relevant to us if ATP is deployed, and if so, how?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's a good question. And Microsoft are an interesting organization. They haven't got the sort of networking and security background that Fortinet have got and the history. But we are seeing a number of products appear from Microsoft. I'd say it kind of goes back to that layered security that we're talking about. So I think with FortiEDR, we can look at various operating systems. We've got Mac support built in, so for an EDR, if I was looking at EDR tools, I wouldn't want some kind of OEM agreement for devices like Macs, and especially with all the remote workers and teleworkers that we're seeing, I think Mac support is probably critical. I don't know the Microsoft product that well, but from what I gather, the ATP is heavily signature driven. So does it do, you want to make sure you've got that pre and post execution. And if you break it down into two different parts, the technical risk and the business risk, from a technical perspective, I'd want my SOC analyst looking at more more than just processes and names and paths. I'd want them having that kind of guided interface and the kind of deep contextual intel that Fortinet can provide. And then I suppose that from a business perspective, if you've got that basic level of forensics, is it going to increase the amount of malware that maybe goes undetected? So I'd say absolutely there's room for both of them, and I think to drive yourself up that security maturity curve, I think EDR is absolutely vital.
Thanks, Anthony. And the next question that we have is, how does EDR integrate with other components in the solution stack?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I sort of mentioned earlier, Fortinet are a very, very innovative technology company, and we tend to build a lot of things ourselves. When we do make acquisitions, we tend to get them at a fairly early stage where we can sort of shine the Fortinet way of being onto them and bring them in and make sure they are talking to all our other products, because ultimately that's everything that we do with the fabric. So straight out of the box, the acquisition we made was already one of our technology partners, so we already integrate with FortiGate, our core product. And then we've got things like FortiSandbox, so detonating the malware in a sandbox. We're seeing a huge increase in our NAC solutions, network access controls. So we integrate with that with EDR. Also, our own SIM solution we integrate with it, as well as all the partners. So yeah, there's already a bunch of things out of the box, and that's only going to increase over the coming months and years, I imagine.
That's fab. Thank you, Anthony. That was a really, really insightful session, giving us excellent background of Fortinet and the overview of the products, but specifically EDR as well. So really grateful for your time. Thoroughly enjoyed that, and hope everyone on the call found that informative as well. As I said earlier, if anyone's got any follow-up questions or wants to have further discussions around this particular product or anything that Fortinet or Switchshop can offer, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or Anthony or Gareth or Richard or any one of your account managers that you already work with. We'd love to hear from you. So as I mentioned, this is the first in the series. So next up in a couple of days, we're talking with Ativo. And then followed by HPE and Aruba in a week or so's time as well. So hopefully you found today's session informative. Please do sign up for those coming up in the future as well. We'd love to see you there. And if you have any follow-up questions or any inquiries, please don't hesitate to get in touch. But thank you to everyone for joining today, and thanks for your time, Anthony, in particular, for running that session with us. And we hope to speak to you all soon.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.